All right, general math 8th graders, this is your quiz corrections or your test corrections for your FA2. It's going to have your mental math, your test, as well as those 4 problems. So make sure that you copy everything down that you need to and check to make sure that you understand why you got them wrong. Let's take a look. Okay, the mental math for this week, A was -5 minus 7. -5 minus 7. And that's equal to a -12. B, -3 minus a -15. -3 minus a -15. And you get a +12. C, -20 times -3. -20 times -3. And you get a +60. D, -22 plus 7. -22 plus 7. And that's equal to a -15. E, 35 minus 5 plus 9. 35 minus 5, which is 30, plus 9 would give you 39. F was a name the property. And to describe the property, I said 3 times the quantity of x minus 2 is equal to 3x minus 6. So that's the distribution property. G was a name the property. 2 plus 3 plus 5 is equal to 2 plus 5 plus 3. So that's the commutative property of addition. H was a name the property, and I said 2 multiplied by the quantity of 3 times 5 is equal to the quantity of 2 times 3 multiplied by 5. And so because it's got that quantity, we're talking about parentheses, so this is the associative property of multiplication. I, 2 times 4 times 6 is equal to 6 times 4 times 2. And because there's no quantity or parentheses, this is the commutative property of multiplication. And J is the quantity of 2 plus 1 added to 4 is equal to 2 added to the quantity of 1 plus 4. And because of those parentheses, it's going to be associative of addition. All right, that's the mental math. Let's go on to the problems. So problem number 1, remember the steps for these absolute values, you have to solve what's in the grouping symbol. So the absolute value of -24 is 24, and then you keep your subtraction sign and your 14. And so 24 minus 14 is a +10. Now, for the 2 methods for the absolute value, I was looking for, if you wanted to do the definition, you would have said it's the distance from 0 or away from 0. Okay, that would be the definition. An example would have had 2 parts to it. You could have shown the negative absolute value of -4 is 4, as well as the absolute value of 4 is equal to 4, and that would have counted as an example. And the diagram would have shown something like a number line, and if you were dealing with the absolute value of -4, you would have shown the 0 and the -4 on the number line, and you would have said that it was 4 hops, or a distance of 4 units from 0. All right, let's look at the next problem. Number 3 is simplify, and this is a multiplication and division, and so basically most of you missed it because you didn't have the right sign. So you have to remember that a negative times a negative is equal to a positive. A negative times a positive is equal to a negative, and a positive times a positive is equal to a positive. And the same thing works if you're using division. So if this is a negative divided by a negative, you still get a positive. If it's a negative divided by a positive, you still get a negative. If it's a positive divided by a positive, you get a positive. So right away, looking at number 3, I know my answer is going to be negative. I just have to solve it. And so 18 times 11 is 198. And you would have boxed your answer. And number 4 says a negative divided by a negative, so I know my answer is going to be a positive. And 135 divided by 15 is really 9. And so my answer is positive 9. Excuse me. Number 5, you're simplifying and it's adding and subtracting. So you have to remember to look at which number appears to be larger. In problem number 5, this number appears to be larger. So therefore, my answer is going to be a negative. And now I just have to subtract. Since they are different numbers, one is negative and one is positive, we're subtracting. They're opposites. So 18 minus 9 is 9, and 1 minus 1 is 0. So my answer ends up being a negative 9. And remember, the other way you can think about this is I have 28 negatives, and I have 19 positives. Well, I'm going to have more negatives, and therefore my answer is a negative. Number 6, remember, we never subtract in algebra. We always add the opposite. And now this number appears to be bigger. 16 is more than 4. So I have 4 negatives, but I have 16 positives. So I know my answer is going to be positive. And because the signs are different, different means subtract. So 16 minus 4 is 12. And my answer is a positive 12. Next problem, number 7. This is order of operations. I have to use GEMDAS. And most of you made an error either in the exponent multiplication or not following GEMDAS. So according to GEMDAS, I have to do my grouping symbols first. So I'm going to write 20 minus 4 squared divided by 8, because my grouping symbol is the 6 plus the 2. And by writing each of my numbers and everything out, I don't drop any symbols. Now I'm done with exponents, or grouping, so I have to do exponents. So I leave my 20, I leave my subtraction sign, and I'm going to do my exponent piece. 4 squared. 4 squared is really 4 times 4, which is 16. So this would say 20 minus 16 divided by 8. Done with my exponents. Now I have to do all multiplication and division before I do adding and subtracting. So that means I have to do this piece before I do the 20 minus anything. So I'm going to write 20 minus, and my division, 16 divided by 8, is 2. And 20 minus 2 is 18. Okay, so number 7, the answer is 18. All right, this is our CST prep question. So I'm going to rewrite it where I can solve it. So I'm just rewriting the exact problem so that I can solve it. So, whoops, I added something wrong. This should be a positive 9. So in my grouping symbols, I have a positive 9 minus 5, which is a 4. But I have to leave my absolute value signs because I just solved what's inside the grouping symbol first. And I'm going to leave this one alone until I do my next step. So the absolute value of 4 is 4. Minus, and the absolute value of negative 2 is 2. So 4 minus 2 is 2, which makes C the correct answer. And then we had 4 math problems that were on the board. And so let's get a paper and let's solve the first problem. The first problem said x minus 3 plus the absolute value of y times z. And the x is equal to a negative 2, the y was equal to a negative 4, and the z was equal to a negative 1/2. So in order to solve this problem, I have to plop my values in, and I always use parentheses so that I don't lose any symbols. And I'm just plugging in my values at this point, and I'm going to do the math in the next problem, or the next step. So I have a negative 2 minus a 3 plus the absolute value of negative 4 times a negative a half. So according to GEMDAS, I have to do my grouping symbols. Well, the first grouping symbol is only here because it's the value that I dropped in. So if I want to remove it, I can. But I'm just going to change my subtraction along the way. I haven't really changed any problem, but I'm going ahead taking care of the parentheses as I go. My next grouping symbol is this absolute value of negative 4. The absolute value of negative 4 is 4. And it's being multiplied by that negative 1/2. And now I'm going to do my next step. GEMDAS says do multiplication and division before you do adding and subtracting. So I have to take care of this piece first. So I'm going to write everything else. And now I have a 4 times a negative half. So 4 times a negative 1/2 is really saying that that this 4 times a negative 1 is a negative 4, and 1 times 2 is 2. And negative 4 divided by 2 is really a negative 2. So I have a negative 2 here. And now I can do my adding and subtracting left to right. Negative 2 plus negative 3 is negative 5 plus a negative 2 gives me a negative 7. And this is my final answer for the first problem. Okay, let's take a look at the second problem. The second problem is 3x plus xy divided by z. And remember, x was equal to negative 2, y was equal to negative 4, and z is equal to negative half. So let's do our steps. 3 times, and my x is a negative 2, so I'm plugging in the negative 2 for x, and I'm plugging in the negative 4 for y. And it's all over z, which is negative a half. And my next step says do all my multiplication in my numerator. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6, plus a negative 2 times a negative 4 is a negative 8, divided by a negative a half. And a negative 6 plus a, oh, I messed up, that should be a positive 8. A negative 6 plus a positive 8 is really a positive 2 divided by a negative half. Lots of you left it this way. We never leave our problems like this. If we read it, it says 2 divided by a negative 1/2. But we don't divide by fractions. We multiply by the reciprocal. So we really have 2 times a negative 2 over 1, which is a negative 4. And so, if you have a negative 4 on your test, then I owe you a point. And if you got the answer of negative 1, I gave you credit, and I shouldn't have. Your problem was wrong. So the real answer to this second problem is negative 4. So let me know tomorrow if I owe you a point. Problem 3. The negative the absolute value of x minus the absolute value of y minus the absolute value of z. All right, so this guy's a z. And our x is equal to a negative 2, our y is equal to a negative 4, and our z is equal to a negative half. So let's plug it in. We have a negative absolute value of negative 2 minus the absolute value of negative 4 minus the absolute value of a half. So we're going to solve our grouping symbols first. So I'm going to leave all these little subtraction signs there. Subtraction. Now we have to solve the absolute value of negative 2 is 2 minus, what is the absolute value of negative 4? It is 4. And then we leave our subtraction sign, and the absolute value of this negative 1/2 is 1/2. So now I'm going to go back through, and I'm going to write it showing that I don't subtract in algebra. I add the opposites. And a negative 2 and a negative 4 is a negative 6, and I'm adding a negative half to it. So I have a negative 6.5, and you can leave it like that, and that's totally fine. Let's look at the last, which is 4 times the quantity x minus 2 minus yz plus 4. And again, x is negative 2, y is negative 4, and z is negative a half. So I'm going to plug in my values. 4 times the quantity, and my x is really that negative 2 minus a 2, minus, and my y is a negative 4 times the z, which is a negative a half, plus a 4. So I have to do what's in my parentheses first. Leave my 4 alone, and negative 2 plus a negative 2 is a negative 4, minus, and I'm going to do this piece here, negative 4 times a half, times a negative half. Negative 4 times a negative half. Well, I'm going to cancel out my equivalent forms of 1, and I'm left with a negative 2 times a negative 1, which gives me a positive 2, and then plus that 4. Let's do our multiplication and division. So 4 times negative 4 is negative 16, minus 2 plus 4. And I don't subtract in algebra, I add the opposites. So I have a negative 16 plus a negative 2, which is a negative 18, plus a positive 4. And I have more negatives than positives, so my answer is negative, and I subtract and get 14. And this is my final answer. Okay, that's the end of your video for tonight. Make sure you tell me if I owe you a point.